Hey, welcome to Bethel Online. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're watching us today, it's by no accident. We believe that God has something just for you. Here at Bethel, we believe that when real people like you and me, encounter the real Jesus, real change happens. So our hope and prayer for you is that you have an encounter with Jesus today. We also believe that God has a next step for all of us to take. Today, your step may just be watching this week's message. It could be asking God to forgive you and finally putting your hope and trust and faith in Jesus for the first time. Maybe it's being baptized or beginning to read through the Bible, whatever it is. We want to help you take that next step. You can let us know what step you're taking by texting the word online to 765-433-2004. We would love to walk with you. During this season, God is teaching us to be flexible. It seems like every week there's a new challenge and more changes. A great way to stay up to date on all the changes that's happening at Bethel is to follow us on social media. It's also a great way to listen to current and past Sunday morning messages. Like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on Instagram. You can find us on all these platforms by searching Bethel Putco. Well, thanks again for tuning in online today. We want you to know that you are wanted, you are welcomed here, and that you are loved. I hope you have a great day. God bless.
Good morning, Bethel. Thanks for joining us. If you're checking us out for the first time this morning, we would love the opportunity to connect with you. We would love for you to message Jason at bethel.us. If you'd like to be included in our weekly messages and our weekly emails to update you on what's going on in the life of the church, you can just send a message to Jason at bethel.us and he would love to add you to our mailing list. We're in the middle of a series right now entitled. Yeah, the series is called Entitled. Now, most of us use the word entitled to describe other people who we think have unfair expectations of what they deserve. But the reality is that you and I probably have it within us to occasionally look at our circumstances, our situation, the body of work in our life, and say, because of that, I deserve something. I mean, sometimes when I work out really hard at the gym, I think I deserve ice cream. I may not need it, and it may not even be best for me, but I occasionally have heard myself saying, but I deserve it. Over these past few weeks, we've been looking at different stories in Scripture and putting them up against some of the ideas that we get in regard to what we deserve. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about rejection. As I interact with people as a pastor, I often see that some of the deepest hurts that people have is a feeling of rejection or just an experience of rejection. Some of the more painful childhood memories that many people exist may even happen within the life of their own home, where they feel like they weren't accepted for who they are, but they were rejected, left out. That they wanted to be a part of something, but they weren't included. That they looked on social media one day and all of their friends were somewhere, but they weren't, and they didn't get invited, and they felt left out. And we can use those examples, but the reality is sometimes you may experience those feelings of being left out even though you don't show them. And they can begin to wear on our heart. It hurts to be overlooked and left out. When it comes to social media, researchers show that just simply having a post like that happens, you post something and people like it, will give you a dopamine rush. And that more and more now than ever, people are becoming obsessed with, am I being rejected or accepted on social media? But friends, it is dangerous to take your value from a platform where everything that you do is being judged as to whether or not it's liked or not. It allows people who know you the least to define you the most. But people are experiencing a feeling of rejection. Why is that person who used to be my friend not my friend anymore? Why didn't this person seem to ever notice anything good that happens in my life? Have you ever sent a text to someone and wondered, why were they so slow to answer me back? Over time, I've learned that, that I have those friends that, I can expect a response in a couple days because they just don't text that much. And then there are those people who, you're like, man, I messaged them 20 minutes ago and they haven't responded. And isn't it funny how, when you get that response back and they're like, oh yeah, I've been really busy today, you feel a sense of, oh, I'm still accepted. And for some of them, they don't not respond because they don't like you. They just don't like texting. The worst is the bubbles. Have you ever sent a text and then you see somebody start to respond and then they wait? And you see the bubbles, they started to type something and then the bubbles go away and you're like, now I know you saw it. Why aren't you responding to me? And isn't it crazy how a feeling of, am I being rejected, can really bring out some ugly insecurities. It can remind us of the times in our home life where maybe we felt rejection, or it can make us feel like the times when we were excluded growing up, where we were put at a different table than the in crowd. You know, I remember as a kid, girls did this thing that I didn't understand. I would be in the third grade and I would get some note from a girl in elementary school, and this note would say, I like you. Can we go together? Check yes or no. And my thought was always, first off, I'm 8. I don't go anywhere. I mean, I go to school and I go home. My parents aren't going to let me go anywhere. I always preferred the opportunity to say maybe, because then that didn't hurt anybody's feelings. And I didn't understand when an 8-year-old girl, when I was an 8-year-old boy, would get the response back, no, because I know I'm not going anywhere with you. I didn't understand what they were actually approaching me about. And see the rejection and tears at a simple age like that. And while your issue may not be as simple and funny as that feeling of rejection, it's funny how those things can go with us throughout life. Those feelings of rejection and left out. You know, in the scripture, there's a story of a man named Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus was a guy who really had done some things that people around him felt that left him deserving to be left out, rejected. You see, Zacchaeus was a tax collector. The scripture says in Luke chapter 19, verse 1, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. Now, there were a lot of people during this time starting to follow Jesus, starting to come around Jesus, where Jesus went, other people went. And then it begins to tell a story. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. Now, Zacchaeus' name meant righteousness. But Zacchaeus, amongst his people, was considered anything but righteous. He was a chief tax collector, and he was wealthy. In Jesus' day and age, the way that it worked was that a tax collector would be charged to go and get tax money from the people. I don't know about you, but I never pay taxes on a pay stub, or even when it comes tax time, or those quarterly tax payments that we pay, and go, yes, I love paying money to the federal government. I mean, I believe I'm a better manager of resources than the federal government. I have convictions about where resources can go. I don't love paying taxes. I mean, if you really love paying taxes, come see me. I've got some that you can help pay. I don't maybe have deep disdain for the people who collect taxes, because it's a job that they have. And in Jesus' day and age, They weren't forced to show what you actually owed on taxes. They just came to your home with an amount that you were to pay. And the tax collector's way of getting paid was to actually charge a little more. So he might go to the home of a widow, and he was there for tax collection, and he didn't have a paper trail to show what she actually owed. He would just say, you owe this much. And he might be charged to raise $100, but he would go to her door and say, you owe $125. And the people in this area were not filled with tons of wealth, and so the people had disdain at having taxes collected in the first place, but they began to learn that there was a crooked system where their own people, who were their tax collectors, were actually stealing from them. And they hated tax collectors. Zacchaeus was known as a tax collector, the lowest of the low, one who would steal from his own people. That's a quick way to get rejected by people. You steal something of theirs, you take something from theirs that they take something from you that they don't deserve to have. And so the people had great disdain for this corrupt system. And it says he was a chief tax collector, that he was even above some other tax collectors, that he was a part of the scheme, and he was wealthy. It's important to note that he was wealthy because the way that he would have gotten wealthy would have been off the backs of other people's hard work. Now here's Zacchaeus. He's in a spot where the whole culture would have rejected him. The religious people would have rejected him. The Pharisees of the day would have wanted nothing to do with him. And when they thought about God and his relationship to people, they would have likely thought that Zacchaeus deserved to be abandoned by God. But it says in verse 3 that Zacchaeus wanted to see who Jesus was. So here he is in a situation where most would have thought that a rabbi shouldn't even speak to him. Where most would have thought that no self-respecting, upright rabbi would have a conversation with Zacchaeus. But as Jesus goes through, I love that Jesus goes through where Zacchaeus is. Because it tells me that if the Son of God would go through a place where Zacchaeus was, that he would also be willing to go through a place where the rest of us who are imperfect, the rest of us who have sinned, the rest of us who have done wrong, that he's willing to encounter us too. And Zacchaeus desired to see who Jesus was. Jesus had been healing some people. He had been teaching in a way that seemed to attract people and attract attention. He seemed to create the occasional uproar about his teaching because the religious people often didn't understand Jesus. Jesus seemed to interact with people who weren't like him, and people who were nothing like Jesus still seemed to like Jesus. It said he wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. He was short, he was little in stature. That he literally not only came up short of the religious rules of the day, but it was obvious in his physical size that he came up short. That it wasn't even something that could be hidden. Several scholars believe that maybe Zacchaeus was actually beyond small, that he was a little person. That maybe his entire life he would have been considered an outsider. Because in Jesus' day and age, when something was up with your stature or something was up with your health, many of the people believed it was because you deserved it. So Jesus is coming through, and the person who most people would have wanted Jesus to ignore wants to see Jesus. It says he had to get over the crowd. He could not see over the crowd. I love that Jesus seems to reach out to the person who otherwise couldn't get to him. He was short. He wasn't just short morally. He physically wasn't able to see Jesus. It says, so he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. There are a couple of words here that I want to focus on a little bit. The verb run ahead and the word climbed. These are significantly in this passage for a reason. It was considered undignified for a Jewish man to run. I mean, they often had kind of a cloak that they wore, and to run could possibly leave you exposed. It was considered undignified. The religious leaders of the day would have scoffed at a man running near the temple or a man running near the presence of God, because that's not dignified. You know, there's another story in Scripture where a son and his father is asked to give his son all of his wealth that will come to him at the end of his life. And when he goes out and wastes everything and comes to a point of desperation, he decides to come back. And when he starts to make his way back to his father, in the story, the father, who represents God, actually runs back to him. When Jesus tells that story, the people are wondering about this God who would be willing to be undignified to go to a son who was, by all means, deserving rejection. And so here Zacchaeus is, by all means, deserving rejection, by all means, being undignified, and he climbs a sycamore tree. So he takes one undignified action and then another by climbing. Climbing was considered the work of a slave. That a master or a wealthy man in the day who was well thought of would have surely never climbed a tree. Someone would have done those kind of things for him. But he wants to see Jesus, and he climbs into the tree to see him. I can only imagine that the people around were like, oh, there's Zacchaeus. What is he doing? He's running over to the tree and climbing, like, oh, how is he even here? Why is he even allowed here with all that he's done? But Zacchaeus runs ahead and climbs. For some of you, today might be a good day for you to start pursuing Jesus. Zacchaeus starts in a place where his life is wrecked and a mess and deserves rejection. But he encounters God because he's willing to run ahead and climb. Are you willing to dig a little bit to encounter Jesus? Are you willing to seek him, to actively seek him, not just hope for an encounter with him, but to say, I want to experience Jesus, this real Jesus that this church says, when he encounters me, will change my life. I think so many people, we just hope that we have an encounter with God, but when you desire to have an encounter with God, he will encounter you. But it may be that your first step to encountering him is being willing to acknowledge just how undignified you really are. It says, when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. Now, a few things strike me here. Jesus, in the midst of these people, already knows Zacchaeus' name. Jesus isn't calling him, hey, short tax collector. Jesus isn't saying, hey, outsider, what are you doing in the tree? Jesus came for people who were undignified and messy. Jesus came for people who were the rejects and the outsiders, and the ones who were disqualified. By all means, Zacchaeus would have been considered unqualified. He speaks to Zacchaeus, all the people around. I wonder if some of the people around were like, what's he doing here? Why would Jesus speak to him? Why would Jesus single out Zacchaeus? I'm sure this was controversial from the religious leaders who were like, why wouldn't Jesus come hang out with us? Why wouldn't Jesus speak to us? I mean, we're better than him. Like, we don't take from our people. We follow the laws. We follow laws that keep us from following the laws. Jesus came for people like Zacchaeus who had been rejected. And Jesus tells him to come down immediately. And that, even beyond that, Jesus wants to come to his house. Now listen, can you imagine the people who knew where Zacchaeus lived? Knew that they paid for that house out of stolen money. The idea that Jesus would go there into that place of the filth of Zacchaeus' life would be offensive. I mean, why wouldn't Jesus eat with the Pharisees? And why wouldn't he eat with the religious sect of the day and the people who seemed to have it together? Why on earth would a pure rabbi think about going into such a crooked place? I read a quote recently that said that somewhere between the limb of the tree and the ground, Jesus transformed Zacchaeus. In the blink of an eye, in a moment, an encounter with God, encounter with Jesus, transforms his life. Know that all of his exposure to the religious world he lived in, the religious habits of people, had not transformed him. All of the judgment and rejection had not transformed him. But Jesus speaks to him to come down and invites himself to Zacchaeus' house. I wonder if Zacchaeus was like, no, I just want to see who you are. Like, I just want to see what all the rush was about. Now you're inviting yourself to my house. Like, I don't know if Zacchaeus was anything like us, but like occasionally we'll have that moment where somebody's like, hey, I'm going to pop in here in a few minutes. And it's like, kids, I don't care what you're doing. It's all hands on deck. Clean the house. Let's do it. Let's get this done. We got 10 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. Somebody's going to be here. Clean the house, sweep the floor. Pick up your stuff. Pick up your socks off the floor. We wouldn't want people to see that sometimes socks lay on our floor. And occasionally we have some dirt that comes along with us that needs picked up. I wonder how much this was true of the religious people around Zacchaeus, that what outwardly was seen about them seemed great. But inwardly, they would be afraid of somebody walking into their home and seeing the real them. Jesus is coming right into the world of a rejected, broken tax collector. I wonder if Zacchaeus felt seen then. But Jesus invites himself. For some of you, today is a day where God is reaching out to you and inviting you to a relationship that goes beyond knowing about him. Because see, there's something that happens when people see you for who you really are. And there's something about being fully exposed to God that's transforming. When we can't put up a facade or a mask to hide who we are, we can have a real encounter with God. I love Zacchaeus' response. I don't know what he did inwardly, but at least outwardly he said that it says that he welcomed him gladly. So he came down at once and welcomed him. All the people, you know what's interesting? Zacchaeus welcomes him gladly. But many of the religious figures of Jesus' day were waiting to welcome the Messiah, and the Messiah was right in front of them. And when the Messiah came, they anything but accepted him. They rejected him. And then all the people saw this and began to mutter. I don't know what they said under their breath. Oh my gosh, Jesus is going to Zacchaeus' house. I mean, what kind of rabbi? They began to judge. I bet they began to judge Jesus, because the scripture says their response that they mutter is, he's gone to be the guest of a sinner. They have taken the job of judging the only one worthy of judging them. because they did, they missed the Messiah. Jesus goes to his house, and when all this is happening, as Jesus is coming to Zacchaeus' house, or in Zacchaeus' house, or even there at the base of the tree, we don't have a lot of context for exactly where every piece was said, but Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anyone out of anything, I'll pay back 4 times the amount." This was the transformation that happened by meeting Jesus. Listen, all of the people standing around, the people who would have been there following Jesus, they knew about a Jewish law. The Jewish law was that if you took something from someone or borrowed something from someone, that you would pay it back. You would give it back, and then you would give 20% more. And they were meticulous about doing this. They were meticulous about giving their 20% more. The law said that if you cheated anybody out of anything, that you had to pay it back plus. And interestingly enough, even though Zacchaeus could have been indicted on all these things, his encounter with God is what allows him to acknowledge what he's done. But it also is evidence that the transformation of a relationship with God is far more powerful than a transformation that happens with religion. Something allows him to go from a selfish, stealing thief to an overtly generous human being who more than makes up for what he has to. That kind of transformation doesn't come from behavior modification. It comes from an encounter with Jesus. Zacchaeus left here unchanged. Zacchaeus left here changed, but many of the people here likely left unchanged. Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." What Jesus is telling him is, you're no longer rejected because I'm in your house. You're no longer rejected because you're mine. The transformation and salvation that happened to him as he moved from the limb of the tree to the ground had changed everything. He was no longer considered the short tax collector. He was Zacchaeus, grafted into God's family, into Jesus' people. From the beginning of time, from the beginning of Christ's death and resurrection, he has been grafting in people from the outside, the left out, the rejected. His own disciples had experienced rejection in life, had not reached the level of rabbi, and he called, or even those who would follow rabbis, and Jesus brings them to him. You know, it looks like maybe Zacchaeus was seeking God, but I think Jesus came to that place that day because he knew Zacchaeus would be there, and he was seeking to save the one who would be rejected otherwise. We can get in the habit of saying, well, I deserve good things. I think Zacchaeus was transformed because he knew he didn't deserve what he had received. To experience extravagant grace will transform you like nothing else. I don't know what rejection you've experienced in your life. 2,000 years ago, God so loved the world. The people who were in it and the people who were yet to be, the people who had been here. God so loved the world that he was willing to send his son to walk among men, to live a sinless life and walk amongst men who deserved rejection, to bring them back to him. You see, Zacchaeus did some things that were considered undignified. But just a short time later after this Jesus, who Zacchaeus met and changed his life, did the thing considered most undignified. He died on a cross to remove the barriers that keep us from God. When we deserved rejection, he offered up his own life to take our place of rejection and shame and sorrow and our left out in order to bring us in. Do you know this Jesus? Yes, if you're watching today, the same Jesus who was willing to go to that place with a man who deeply needed to encounter him is willing to encounter you. Are you willing to run and climb? Because I think he knows you're ready. I think he's ready for an encounter with you. And that encounter with you will transform who you are. See, too often we think we have to improve our performance before we connect with God. But the only thing that powers real transformation is a relationship with him. And he is calling you to that relationship. In the twinkling of an eye, in just a moment, God will call you out of the tree to walk with him so he can light up your path of your life, so he can begin to guide your life. All you have to do is receive him. My friend, if you're here today and you've come to the realization that what you really deserve is to be left out, there's a God who's calling you in. If you're willing to acknowledge who you've been in his presence, he's willing to transform you. Simply asking him this morning to receive you in your broken state, to let you in, will bring you to a place of acceptance, and then that place of acceptance will empower you to change. I don't know what kind of things Zacchaeus had been through in his life, what challenges other than his height and even his position had given him. We all have challenges. I'm amazed at the people who sit down across the table from me and they look like they have it all together and they begin to share their challenges. And I've also learned it's hard to be jealous of people when they share their challenges because we all have them. We all, through this life, step in piles of giant mess. We all wind up in places we didn't intend to go and do things that we shouldn't have done. And God calls us to get up out of the mess and to walk with him. And I wonder, over the course of Zacchaeus' life, how what he had experienced impacted his passion and compassion for other people. I love you, Bethel. Have a great week.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Are you ready to take your next step? We would love to hear from you. You can send an email to hello@bethel.us. You can send us a message on Facebook, or you can let us know in the Bethel app. And speaking of the Bethel app, take a moment, if you haven't already, to go to your app store and search Bethel Putco to download our app. There's all kinds of great resources in the app. You can listen to messages, you can view the messages for Sunday morning, and you can also fill out a digital Connect card. You can do that today and each week to let us know that you're tuning in. You can also find some great information about our Bethel Kids Ministry and our Be The One student ministries. Also in the app, you can give. It's one of 3 ways you can give, with online giving at bethel.us/give, in our app, Bethel Putco, or through text. Hey, thanks again for joining us. We hope you have a great day and know that you are loved.